Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. In the last video, we have discussed how would you create and connect to your Windows virtual machine on Azure. In today's video, I'm going to walk you through how would you create a Linux virtual machine, how would you connect to that virtual machine, and how would you enable SSH from the network security group. If you are getting started with cloud computing, this is the most essential skills that you need to learn before you dive deep into the cloud computing topics. I will cover everything from choosing the right virtual machine SQ to the image selection to the authentication types and many more. Ready to make the Azure cloud your comfortable zone? Let's get started. Alright, let's create a Linux virtual machine. As I mentioned previously, I am not a Linux admin, so I'm a Windows guy, but in today's video, the purpose of this video is basically to show you how would you create a virtual machine based on Linux and how would you SSH to that virtual machine. If you want to play around this, you can go to the documentation and then start to play around this, but the creation is pretty much the same as the Windows VM, except you just select the Linux image that you would like to use, and then it will get created for you. Now, as I mentioned, we or in our infrastructure, if you remember, we have a virtual network, and this virtual network we have a VNet production hub, and this is located in West Europe. So if you creating a VM, it must exist within the same region if you would like to locate the same virtual network. If you create in a different region, then you won't be able to do to find that virtual network, and then you have to create new one in that selected region. So if I go under this, I have a one subnet, which is SNet prod hub default, which and I got a 251 available IP address, and this is the subnet range 10.1.0.0/24. So if I go back to Microsoft Azure, when I click here, then I can click on the hamburger menu. I should be able to find my virtual machine, or I can search, or if you recently visited the VMs, and of course we have been explaining this over the last few videos, so I came many times into the recent services, so that's why it exists here. You can see recent, and then these are the resources I've accessed. So also I can go from all services here, and then under all services I should be able to find all or even compute, and under compute you should be able to find infrastructure as a service, and then under infrastructure as a service you should be able to find virtual machines. Let me just find it quickly here. Yeah, this is the virtual machines. Again, if you want to create PaaS services, which also in the upcoming series we're going to talk about the Azure App Services, which is the service that will allow you to create websites and mobile apps. You will be able to create functions, logic apps, and so on. It has many features. But again, we will see this on, we see the difference. We'll also talk about the container and microservices. So this is also the serverless approach as well, but this is pretty much the platform as a service. So all of these are platform as a service. This is basically infrastructure as a service. So I can create a virtual machine from here. So I'm selecting my virtual machine, and then under the virtual machine blade here, I can create new virtual machine. Remember, my virtual network is in West Europe, so that's why I'm selecting West Europe here. So I will select my resource group. Again, this is default on any resource, like what is your subscription, what is your billing basically, and where is your resource group. Let me just select a different one here, maybe this one. It doesn't matter. I just want to keep it as West Europe, although I can select my resource group here and then switch this to West Europe, but just for simplicity I will go here for the virtual network resource group. Doesn't matter. And then here I will use a very creative name like Linux 1 or you can call it web server, databases, whatever. Here noticed it selected my my region automatically from the resource group because it exists in West Europe, and then also there's what we call the availability zone selection. So you can actually self-selection, so which means is that you can select it yourself here. You can place it on 1 or 2 or 3. It depends if you would like to create a high availability for web server or database, then you can place it, maybe create 3 web server instances and then distribute it onto different zones. So if one data center is down, then you have the others as well is up and running. Here I'll just select the security type from the BIOS perspective is standard. And then instead of I use Windows Server, I'm gonna use the Linux. So as I mentioned, this is the recently used. This is the most commonly, or the marketplace getting started. This is the most commonly chosen. So you can see here, it's showing you by category. If I want to see other images, I can click also on See All Images. When I click here, this is as I mentioned, the pre-built images by Microsoft and its partners. You can also find your custom images. You can see it here, my images, shared images, but right now I don't have like any images, and you can see also the community images as well. So it's huge. But for now, what I will do is just, I'm gonna click on all under the marketplace, and then I can select my operating system here. Filter, instead of this guy, I will just only select the Linux ones. I can even select Ubuntu or even other Linux distribution as well. Okay, so once I click on that filter, notice there's more than 526 pages, right? Also 469 now. But you can see it's pretty much got all the Linux flavor. So for the people who think that Microsoft only runs Windows workload, it's not true. Like, you have both, and actually a lot of our customers are leveraging Linux on Azure today. So it doesn't really, Microsoft doesn't really care about that. But you can see, you can keep clicking on next, and then you will be able to see the other images. If you want Red Hat, for example, here you can actually see the Red Hat with SAP, with HA updates, and so on. You can see every release, it's gonna be there, so you can select whatever it suits your use case and your needs. So again, it's pages and pages. You can see it's a lot of Linux distribution. You can see even firewall, third-party firewall like Fortinet, based on Linux VM. And you can Palo Alto here, so it's great example. Okay, so it's either you can install the operating system alone, or you can install it with a different packaging. Like if you have license for Palo Alto or Fortinet, you can use it if you would like to deploy a Linux virtual machine with a firewall. But you can also use the Azure firewall. So it's up to you. Like when you decide that, whether do you want to manage the firewall and the high availability, or do you want Microsoft to manage that for you? It's totally up to you. Now let me just pick any Ubuntu here, Ubuntu 24, all plans, and then you can click on select. I'll just select the latest. I'm not really I don't know the differences here, but there's ARM and there is the x64 Gen 2. So I'll just select this image, and then notice here the VM architecture automatically selected to 64. It also selected my virtual machine. As I mentioned, you always can select your virtual machine size, depends on your need, what kind of vCPU, what kind of RAM, the maximum IOPS, and the number of data disks that you can attach. So this is basically very important. Like, how many disks do you want to attach to the same virtual machine? You can see for larger SQ, you can have a lot, but again, this is so important also to consider. And then you can see also the monthly cost. So if you're running this virtual machine 24/7, this is what you're going to pay. Depends on the virtual machine type. So is it D, is it F, is it E? We have discussed this in the previous episode. Now, I'm just showing you this, but I will just go with the recommended size. And then here you can select enable hibernation if you want to. And then here you have the authentication type. So it's either you're going to use the SSH public key. So you download an SSH public key, and then you can supply that and then connect to your VM. I don't want to download anything, so I'm just going to do username and password here. So I'll type my username as if it's a Windows machine. And then this is my password. notice here, once it realized that this is a Linux VM, the the Azure portal is smart enough to just will tell you, hey, I'm going to create an inbound role to the public internet. So this is what's telling you here. Select which virtual machine network ports are accessible from the public internet. You can specify more limited or granular network access on the networking tab. Okay, so it will automatically show up here SSH. Okay, if I click next, I can select my disk operating system. So the image default is 30 gig. You can increase, it's up to you. You can even change the size of that OS disk later on. But we will discuss this on a later video as well. This is part of the Azure administration beginner path. Now I'm going to the virtual network tab. It automatically found the the VNet prod hub. And then here, this is the SNet prod hub default that we have been discussing in the beginning of the video. And then it will also create a new public IP address. This is where we can access the virtual machine from the internet, because we're not on the same network. I will show you also different ways. That's also on the later videos. But for now, I'm just allowing here the public IP. This is the basic network security group setup, and this is the inbound roles that's going to be open to everyone into the world, but this is not recommended. So I'll click next. But before I go from here, can I enable, can I have a public IP and then maybe enable HTTPS, like inbound role for HTTPS? Absolutely yes, right? So if I have a web server that I am offering something like Facebook or Twitter, or maybe just regular website that I'm delivering to my customers, I need everyone to access it from the internet. So I have to open an inbound roles for HTTPS or HTTP. However, for the management ports, which is SSH, it's not supposed to open to the world. Like, you have to open it to a specific network. Even if it's on public internet, you can actually specify your public IP address or specific subnets or specific IP address, or maybe over IPsec tunnel like VPN or ExpressRoute. But you never open the management ports to everyone. It's not required. Like, why would you expose your management port of your server? So this is just, I wanted to stress on this. This is it's showing you here a warning, right? So remember, this is not secure. And then here, this is just some basic plan. I will just disable auto shutdown because we're going to delete this machine in any case. And then I will disable monitoring, review and create, and then hit create. So as you can see, it will give me here the summary of our choices. It's also going to warn me you have an SSH port open to the internet. This is only recommended for testing purposes. And then it will show up here how much you are going to pay per hour. So we're gonna pay a few pennies or a few cents, and then this is your whole basically your whole selection that we have done on the Azure portal, like the summary, the subscription, the type of the the virtual machine that we have selected. Is it password or SSH? The authentication type, which virtual network is going to land, and then your Defender for Cloud is enabled or disabled, and then I can create. So once it's created here, I will have a Linux VM up and running. All right, it was created successfully. It took less than a minute, I think. So it was very quick compared to the Windows VM, because Linux, is much faster. But you can see here, even a few seconds. That's the portal. Like, if you create the same Windows virtual machine, it will create around a minute or so till you have that machine up and running. So now let's go to that resource. Right, so I have a VM here. I can also go again, search virtual machine. Notice in here I have Linux 1. It is on my subscription. This is the resource group. This is the location of the virtual machine. The status is running. Operating system is Linux, and then the SQ, and then the public IP address. If I click on that Linux virtual machine, I can see also the same blade. Like, there is no difference between the Windows and Linux operating system in terms of the Azure portal interface. So you can see computer name is Linux 1, operating system type is Ubuntu, the VM Gen 2, agent version, like 2.15. We will talk about the agent and stuff like that. But you can see pretty much what we have selected. This is the private IP address, and this is the public IP address. And if I go under networking, literally there is no difference. And then we will see the network security group that there is SSH port open, and then it's any to any destination, and the rule is basically allow. Okay. Now let me click here, and then let's try to connect to that machine. So what I will do here, because I don't memorize how to write that command, again, I just can click on connect, and then it will tell you here, hey, execute this in your local shell, SSH, and then your username, and then the public IP of your your Linux virtual machine. So I can just copy that and then open PowerShell, and then I will be able to connect to my virtual machine. So I have a shell session open here. It's either you're gonna use Windows PowerShell or PuTTY or even Linux operating system if you have, or Mac OS or whatever. And what I've done also, I've installed what we call it Windows Subsystem for Linux 2 or WSL2, which will allow me, or it will give me like a Linux kernel inside Windows. So it will just load a full Linux operating system. And then I can just SSH to or like run Linux commands directly. So I'm in the root, and then I just can SSH to that virtual machine. So are you sure you want to continue? So I will say yes. Then it's asking for the password. So I'm gonna write my password. And then hit enter. All right. Here we go. So now I am on the virtual machine on Azure. So you can see here, welcome to Ubuntu 24, GNU, Linux, blah, 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 Azure 8664. And this is the hello documentation. So you can click on help.ubuntu.com, and then you can take a look of what's going on here. So you can see also the system information, like, the system load, processor usage, the IP address of that, and then the memory usage, and so on, right? So you can start now to use your Linux. This is not your local Linux, this is the Azure Linux. So you're connecting to the cloud now over the public IP. As you can see, it's telling you here fun to add the Linux one. So I'm inside that Linux virtual machine. If I go to the Linux documentation or Ubuntu documentation, I just can go to the terminal here, and then I can start to execute some commands. So you can start to play around this, like, type pwd, like /home/fonto, and then you can start to play around this, like, cd/, and then you can do pwd again, add the slash folder here. This is the, like, if you would like to change the directory, you can use the cd command. Then you can go cd home, right? So cd home. So I am in home now. You can do pwd again and see, I'm /home. You can go back, go forward. So it will show up here. How would you navigate to, your Linux stuff? You can see here there's also how would you make directory and then create maybe a folder, create a file. So you can start practicing your Linux commands, and I will leave all of this documentation in the description. There's also here how would you check the usage, the CPU usage. So let me try that. So cat, this is the command, and this is what is gonna show you here. I don't know what is this, but again, I'm just showing you here, let me just try different stuff. Yeah, I'm not sure. But again, you can pretty much, maybe let's take a look at top here, try this. Yeah, you can see here, everything, from the commands you use. You can read the documentation, see what's happening here. This list frequency as background change, blah, blah, blah. So let me just do Control-C and then try again, Top-I. Again, for guys who wants to troubleshoot. For us, like I use Windows Task Manager, but again, if you, it's showing you the CPU, you know, stuff like that. So it's really like you need to get your hands dirty basically, and then once you're done, you can close that like, you know, Linux instance, and you're good to go. So if I close that terminal, then we close the session to the Azure cloud. So the one thing I want to tell you before I leave from here is Windows Subsystem for Linux is very good for especially if you're learning Linux, or if you're new to Linux and you're still used to Windows. You can actually deploy that if you're interested in how to install Windows Subsystem for Linux and then download the Linux kernel. I basically downloaded the Linux kernel from the store. But if you were interested to do, like, you know, how would you set up the Linux kernel or the Windows Subsystem for Linux on Windows 11, let me know, and then we can do another video for this one as well. I hope this video was useful for you. If you have any questions, please leave it on the comment below, and I appreciate if you like and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.